Signs importance. A zombie plague known as the Curse of Unbelief swept through many imperial worlds throughout the Bellis Corona and Agrippina sector. Fanatical cults preaching that the imperium had forsaken the teachings of the emperor grew in number. They decried the sufferer's sickness as just punishment for their wickedness, claiming that only in the flames of purgation could the cure be found, and they would provide both. On the worlds of Malian's Reach and Leitar, imperial rule all but broke down as the plague crippled the authorities' ability to contain the rantings of self-proclaimed prophets of the end times, who whipped entire populations into frenzy of insanity. The ecclesiarchy had dispatched the highest officers of the imperial church to quiet the souls of the people. Yet, at this time of direst need, the Adeptus Ministorum had itself become embroiled in internecine conflict. A number of cardinals had cast their lot with those who preached that the emperor's judgment had found his servants wanting, rendering the synods of the sectors surrounding the Eye of Terror impotent and powerless to impose their spiritual authority when it was most desperately needed. Naval facilities and symbols of imperial rule were openly attacked, and over the following solar weeks, mob rule virtually replaced that of the administratum on many outlying worlds. Overpopulated hive worlds as far apart as the Scarus and the Cadian sectors erupted in violence, seemingly without cause. Even the higher echelons of the hive world Tabor and the naval bases at Bellis Corona proved to be riven with chaos cults. Charismatic demagogues incited frenzied mobs to fight the ruthless, crushing oppression inherent in the imperium's system of rule, and hundreds of thousands heeded their seditious ravings. Assassinations and poisonings heralded new eras of anarchy in key war zones, and whole supply fleets mysteriously vanished. Nemesis Teresa, St. Josman's Hope, and Leitar were all ravaged by insurrection. In the panicked streets of Thracian Primaris, one man alone had succeeded in uniting the desperate citizens against the evils of chaos as a raving prophet. The worlds of the Bellis Corona system underwent a massive recruitment drive for the Imperium Guard and the Imperial Navy, and priestly delegations stirred up the new imperial conscripts into a fever of righteous anger. In the wake of such catastrophic breakdown of imperial rule on so many planets in the sectors surrounding the Eye of Terror, vast disturbances were sensed in the warp, steering the already volatile medium of the Imperium into new and violent life. The fringes of Warpstorm Baphomet expanded to engulf the edges of the Cadian system, and many of the astropaths based there reported terrible visions and bloody omens that all pointed to a time of coming war. Reports kept pouring in, which indicated a horrifying escalation in the scale of these disturbances. While news from across the segmentum was sketchy at best, it appeared that a massive psychic backlash had caused the astropathic choir chamber at Belisar in one of the spires of Hive Terax to explode. The top 9 levels of the spire had been obliterated, and the death toll was numbered in the tens of thousands. Any doubt that chaos was in ascendant was cast aside following these events on almost every civilized world. Even on Cadia, the Imperium had seen signs of recidivist activities. So close to the eye, the Cadians had come to expect the taint of the warp to afflict those of weak soul, and they had learned to recognize and excise its influence whenever it was found. In one notable incident, Lord Commissar Salad seconded the company of Karaskin, assigned to headquarters security, and led a raid upon the barracks of the 92nd Cadian Regiment. He rounded up a cadre of senior officers who, he claimed, were in league with the agents of the warp. No evidence of his accusation was presented to the general staff, and there was no duty upon the Lord Commissar to do so. The officers were summarily executed upon the parade ground of Kaskar Orlak. That highly regarded officers of the Cadian military might have thrown in their lot with the arch enemy, filled many souls with shame, and confirmed the worst of their fears. A dark time was surely approaching. The voice of the Emperor. On the world of Lenitar. What was that supposed to be? Lenitar. On the world of Lenitar, a powerful figure had arisen amongst the raving cults and fanatics, proclaiming himself to be the voice of the Emperor. An orator of fearsome skill, this mysterious individual had roused the entire population with his passionate speeches. Many within the Cadian sector high command advocated the extermination of this individual, lest his outpourings lead to further unrest. However, all across the system, the backlash of those still faithful to the imperium began. The Inquisition's Ordos Cadia, the representative of the three ordos in the Cadian sector, believed the so-called voice of the emperor to be an individual of the utmost danger. Leitar was home to several thousand planetary defense force regiments, divided into 65 army groups, and it appeared that an estimated of 40% of their personnel had thrown in their lot with the so-called voice. Many of these units had deserted, a large number actually making it off-world, where they had dispersed to varying locations, including the worlds of Yayor, Amistel, Albiter, and Barel. That the imperial forces had lost such a body of men to a demagogue was cause for grave concern in itself, but it was enough for the high command that the Ordo Hereticus wanted him dead. Within a solar week, there was a great resurgence of orthodox piety amongst the imperial citizenry, as a reaction against the so-called voice of the emperor. Sector High Command had initially feared that the teachings of this heretic might plunge the region into the depths of apostasy. Yet the people actually rallied against his twisted followers, casting down his prophets and decrying his false words. His days were numbered as inquisitorial agents of the throne hunted the elusive voice. Though chaos and anarchy had come to a great many worlds of the Imperium, they still had reason for hope, for all was not lost while their faith remained strong. The great strength of the Imperium was finally stirring. The Cadian Sector High Command ordered a muster to take place at Cadia, upon the ancient and venerated Tyrok fields, so that the Imperium could begin the Emperor's work in earnest. Sabotage and insurrection. Several systems in the Scarus sector soon reported enemy activity, as did three subsectors located along the Cassandra Spar. Reports also came from Fossar Prime, indicating an attack by warriors thought to be of the Night Lord's Traitor Legion. The raid was timed to coincide with the local annual festival of the Three Maidens, a holy time for the population of Fossar Prime and his 3 moons, during which the adherents fasted and meditated upon their own weaknesses, the better to serve their lord, the God Emperor. Evidently, the attackers took advantage of the fact that most of the world's population were cloistered in prayer and descended upon the world's capital city of Medea, like a pack of feral predators upon its prey. Survivors reported that the enemy made planetfall at Medea's primary genitorium, destroying it and plunging the city into darkness, before crippling the metropolis's reserve power facilities. With the city's power grid out of action, the traders stalked the streets, killing wantonly as and when they saw fit. It was many solar hours before the planetary defense forces could be mobilized to face the threat, although many militia units mounted heroic improvised counterattacks, all to no avail. By the time the native defense force were able to muster, the raiders had vanished into darkness, leaving a death toll of many thousands in their wake. The world of Xerxia, that's a weird name. The world of Xerxia had also suffered at the hands of the enemy. A delegation from the Order of the Wounded Heart, an order militant of the Adepta Sororitas, had arrived on the planet. Immediately after the Battle Sisters' arrival, it was reported that a small force of unidentified traitor marines had been defeated when they came to the aid of a chaos cult that the sisters were seeking to purge. It appears the cult had chosen their moment to call upon the traitor Astartes with great care, hoping that the counterattack would wipe out the small force of battle sisters as they closed upon their target. It is a great credit to the Sororitas that they defeated both the cultists and the renegades, and the condemnation was passed on their Canonist Superior. Sector High Command also received garbled astropathic communications from forces in the Helotas, Sarlax, Vagera, and Skyren systems over the following 12 solar hours. Though no details were immediately confirmed, High Command feared the worst. The Ormantep Raid. The listening station of the world of Ormantep had also come under attack by traitor forces. The attackers were a small, elite company of Black Legionnaires who fell upon the listening post with cold, methodical brutality and cut down all they encountered. However, they seemed specifically determined to murder the astropathic choir that resided within the central keep. The unit of Cadia and Kaskir defending the station mounted a heroic defense that held off the Chaos Space Marines for several solar hours before the raid came from a totally unanticipated quarter. It appears that the traitors were repelled, though by a force the Imperium has no record of. As the traitors closed on the hastily constructed barricades of the Ormantep's listening station's inner sanctum, survivors reported that the night was filled with a mournful hollow which sounded from all directions. As the Black Legionnaires faltered in their attack and cast glances in all directions, the rearmost were dragged into the shadows. Soon the Chaos Space Marines were firing their bolters on full automatic and emptying entire magazines into the gloom. As more were sent upon by an enemy, the Kaskrian's defenders could not discern. In only solar minutes, the Black Legionnaires were all dead. Their bodies were found savagely ripped open as if by hugely powerful jaws or raked by savage claws. The only evidence of this mysterious force that attacked them was the distorted Vox recording of the howls that filled the complex in the moments before the Chaos Space Marines attacked. It will later be determined by Imperial scholars that these mysterious saviors were none other than the long-lost Space Wolf 13th Great Company, lost for 10 millennia within the warps and the closing days of the Horus Heresy. Reports indicated a handful, at most, of the station's personnel had survived the attack, and they had requested a naval task force redirect to Ormantep to ascertain what exactly had occurred. All of this came at a time when civil disorder across the surrounding sectors and the Segmentum Obscurus had reached unprecedented levels. Now the Imperial forces had to guard against both traitors within and traitors without. Treachery. The Battle of Tyrek Fields. During the outset of Abbadon's 13th Black Crusade, an act of basest treachery struck at the heart of the Imperium's defenses. At the time, Cadia was alive within the diligent preparations of the servants of the Emperor. Regiments of Cadian shock troops were being mustered alongside the Adeptus Mechanicus Titan legions and Scitari. Regiments of mighty Tiwid feral warriors stood alongside the brightly accounted troops of the Mordarian Iron Guard. Amongst this mighty throng, faith willed strong, and the morale of every man soared to see the amassed power of the Emperor. But a vile serpent lay ready to strike. The regiments of the Volscani cataphracts had landed on Cadia to join the muster at Kaskar Tyrok. Yet, in truth, the troops and officers of the Volscani regiment feared to face the forces of chaos again, and even if they had not formally pledged their allegiance to the dark gods, they had decided that it was better to die in clean battle against men in service to a dark cause than to stand at the gate of the warp and close ranks in the face of the powers of hell once more. As the defenders of the Cadian Gate prepared for conflict, the traitorous Volscani cataphracts revealed their new allegiance to the ruinous powers when they unexpectedly struck in force at the Imperial Guard's troops being mustered at the Tyrok Fields. The traitors slaughtered thousands of loyal guardsmen before any response could be coordinated. The intent of the Volscani's treason was revealed as they swarmed aboard the Leviathan Escubitoi Castellum, which served as the command vehicle of the governor Primus Marius Porlaslac of Cadia. The traitors proceeded to slaughter him and much of their senior command of Cadia's armed forces. This included the commander-in-chief of the defenders of the Cadian Gate, who was killed in the brutal attack. At the darkest moment, then, Colonel Ursarak E. Creed took control of the dire situation. Rallying the 8th Cadian Shock Troops Regiment, the bloodied Imperial defenders were quickly organized in order to advance upon the traitors. The 8th Cadian led the charge into the ranks of the Volscani. Creed and Yaran Kel, his regimental standard-bearer and most trusted friend, led the way during the counterattack, and it was they who reached the command deck first and succeeded in preventing the foul desecration of the fallen body of the governor Primus. The governor had fallen, as a Cadian should, with a blade in his hand and heretics at his feet. Creed carried the body of the governor back to the battlements of the Leviathan, wrapped in the banner of the 8th Cadian. Many more Cadian regiments came upon the scene, and a great throng of them gathered around. Colonel Creed, being a pious man, allowed them to sing their praise to the god emperor, and then, from his lofty position, he delivered his first exhortation to the armies of Cadia, to strive without rest until every disciple of chaos had suffered the same fate as the Volscani. The host demanded that Ursakar should take command. 3 times he refused the offer, but ultimately he accepted to the will of the mass regiments of Cadia. As ever, greatness thrust itself upon Ursakar's Creed, and he could and he could but strain to bear its weight. Through Creed's action, what might have been a grievous defeat for the Imperium and a nefarious victory for the hordes of the arch-enemy was turned into a defining moment for the defenders of Cadia. Every man and woman of the fortress world swore to repurpose themselves to the defense of the Emperor's realm. Preparations for war. Following the betrayal at Cadia, pleas for aid from Imperial forces beyond the Cadian sector had been dispatched to military commands in the surrounding sectors. Warriors from the lauded chapters of the Astartes Praeses and from the Space Wolves were expected to reinforce the beleaguered Imperial forces. Naval assets had been promised from Cyphra Mundi, and regimental muster had begun in many nearby sectors. The full might of the Imperium was gathering, but only time would tell whether or not it would arrive in time. That a major chaos incursion was imminent was now beyond doubt, but the arch-enemy would still find the Imperium ready, if only the preparations could be completed in time. Creed promoted those Imperial Guard officers he felt were worthy, and ruthlessly demoted or transferred those officers he deemed ineffectual. Though many resented his brusque manner, and he had undoubtedly made many enemies amongst the established Cadian officer class, many believed that his approach was a necessary one, considering the monumental task at hand. Though Cadian morale had been dealt a terrible blow by the betrayal at Kasr Tyrok, Ursakar E. Creed had rallied the Imperial Guard and Planetary Defense Forces, charged with the defense of Cadia and the Cadian Gate magnificently, as Cadia's new commander-in-chief and Lord Castellan. Though many senior officers had seen men who had fought 100 battles over their careers waver, a single word from Creed could galvanize them into action. The man was imbued with fierce resolution, and those under him could not help but be infected by it. The work of organizing the forces at Cadia's disposal continued at a rapid pace as the penultimate year of the 31st millennium opened. As was standard practice, each world contributed regiments and organized its forces into battle groups, and Sector High Command assigned Departamento Monitorum support services to each as they became available. Cadia was fortunate in that many worlds of the Segmentum Obscurus followed the Cadian example with regard to regimental structure, equipment, and combat doctrine, though there were notable exceptions to this rule, with Imperial Guard units such as those raised from the worlds of Feinherd and Mordant, with a starting establishment of 6 to 9 Imperial Guard regiments per battle group, and at least 6 such groups formed in an army. Cadian Sector High Command had been able to assign a minimum of 10 army groups to the defense of every notable world in the region, with the capital worlds assigned as many as 100. Of course, experiences showed that these battle groups would soon break down once they were required to redeploy to meet combat needs as conflict developed. And staff officers on the ground would need to organize their forces as best they were able. Such was the reality of staff work when one was required to coordinate highly diverse units over such vast distances.